Every parent knows the weight of watching their children go without, and Elijah Mendoza felt that burden crushing his chest every single day. After losing his wife during the pandemic and his janitorial job at the community college, this father of 6-year-old twins was barely keeping his family alive in a beat-up Honda Civic parked behind Ramirez Market, a shuttered grocery store on Albuquerque's south side. The building's broken neon sign flickered fresh, in stuttering pink letters, casting strange shadows across their makeshift home. The alarm on Eli's cracked phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before he'd set it to ring. He'd been awake anyway, staring through the windshield at the desert sky that stretched endlessly above them. In the back seat, his twin daughters slept curled together like kittens. Luna, with her wild curls pressed against the window, clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit that had seen better years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Saul, always the careful one, had organized their few belongings in precise stacks around her. A tablet with a spiderweb crack across the screen, 3 library books, and a ziplock bag containing the dried marigold petals their mother used to put in everything she cooked. The thought of Maria hit him like it always did, sudden and sharp, a knife between his ribs. 3 years gone, and still he reached for her hand in those drowsy moments before dawn. Still saved the last sip of his coffee for her. Still caught himself buying her favorite oranges at the market before remembering they didn't have money for oranges anymore. Eli pulled on his faded Desert Mesa construction t-shirt, the logo barely visible after too many washes in gas station bathrooms. First job started at 6 a.m. sharp, and Supervisor Martinez had made it clear that being 5 minutes late meant being unemployed. In this economy, in this town, nobody got second chances. "Daddy," Luna's voice was soft, sleep-heavy. "Are we moving today?" "Not today, Meja. Go back to sleep." But Saul was already awake, those dark eyes that missed nothing studying his face in the rearview mirror. At 6, she was too young to understand eviction notices and overdue rent, but old enough to recognize the particular weight that settled on her father's shoulders when the money ran out. The workday passed in a blur of concrete and rebar, the desert sun climbing until the air shimmered with heat. Eli's crew was pouring foundation for another strip mall, the kind of development that promised jobs and prosperity, but usually delivered empty storefronts and broken dreams. Still, it was work, and work meant gas money and maybe something from the dollar menu at McDonald's. During lunch break, Eli sat in the shade of the cement mixer and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from when Sol had dropped it last month, but it still worked. He opened his banking app and stared at the numbers. After today's pay, after gas and Sol's asthma inhaler, they'd have exactly $37 left. The math was simple and brutal. "Rough day?" asked Jimmy Santos, settling beside him with a bologna sandwich that made Eli's stomach clench with hunger. "Just thinking," Eli replied. "About what?" Eli hesitated. Jimmy was a good man, had been laid off from the college the same day Eli had, but desperation made people do strange things, and Eli had learned to keep his thoughts to himself. Nothing important. That evening, as they shared a gas station burrito 3 ways in the Civic's front seat, Sol pulled out her tablet. The Wi-Fi from the abandoned market still worked, somehow, probably forgotten by whatever company had owned the building before it went dark. "Daddy, there's a letter for you," Sol said, holding up the tablet. She'd been checking his email for weeks, her small fingers surprisingly nimble on the cracked screen. "It says it's from a lawyer." Eli's stomach dropped. Lawyers meant bad news, evictions, debts, problems he couldn't fix. But as he read the email, confusion replaced fear. "Mr. Mendoza, I am writing to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Ernesto Mendoza. As per his will, you are the sole beneficiary of his remaining assets. Please contact our office to arrange transfer of property located at 1847 Desert Wind Road, Unit 12. "Uncle Ernie?" Luna looked up from her half of the burrito. "The one with the funny truck?" Eli barely remembered his uncle, his father's brother who drifted in and out of family gatherings like smoke, always carrying stories of the road and the smell of chili powder on his clothes. They'd fallen out of touch years ago, after some family argument Eli couldn't even remember. "He had a food truck?" Saul asked. "Had a lot of trucks," Eli said slowly. "Never knew what happened to them." The address led them to a sprawling junkyard on the edge of town, where automotive corpses rusted under the desert stars. The owner, a weathered man named Pete, led them past rows of stripped cars and abandoned dreams to a corner lot where something waited under a paint-stained tarp. "Your uncle paid the storage fee for 20 years, Pete said, pulling away the covering. Said someone in the family would come for it eventually." Underneath sat a food truck that looked like it had been painted by fever dreams. Neon swirls in faded pink and turquoise covered its aluminum sides, and someone had spray-painted Ghost Route across the windshield in silver letters that caught the moonlight. It was beat up, rusted in places, and covered in decades of dust, but it was theirs. "Can we go inside?" Luna whispered. The door opened with a screech of protest. Inside, the truck smelled of old spices and memories. Ancient equipment lined the walls. A flat-top grill, a deep fryer, containers filled with mysterious powders and dried herbs. Luna immediately gravitated toward the spice rack, her nose twitching as she identified scents their mother used to weave into her cooking. "This one smells like home," she said, holding up a jar of cumin. Then she moved to another. "And this one smells like sunshine." She began mixing pinches of different spices into her palm, tasting combinations with the serious concentration of a scientist. Saul was exploring too, but with her tablet raised, documenting everything. "Dad, look at this!" She'd found a wooden box wedged behind the passenger seat. Inside were photographs. Uncle Ernie with other food truck owners, maps covered in mysterious markings, and recipes written in a code neither twin could read. "What's this taste like?" Luna held out her palm, where she'd mixed cumin, paprika, something that smelled like chocolate, and dried chilies. Eli tasted it and felt his eyes widen. Somehow, impossibly, his 6-year-old daughter had created something magical, smoky and sweet and complex, with a heat that built slowly and warmed everything it touched. "Saul, are you filming this?" "Always," Saul replied, grinning behind her tablet. That night, they slept in the truck for the first time. It felt like possibility. 3 days later, Eli was still trying to figure out how to make the truck work when Luna changed everything. They'd spent the weekend scrounging parts from Pete's junkyard. A battery here, some wiring there, whatever they could afford with their last $37. Saul had appointed herself research director, watching YouTube videos about food truck mechanics and taking notes in her careful handwriting. Luna had claimed the spice rack, experimenting with combinations that made Eli's mouth water and his eyes tear up in equal measure. "Daddy, I made something new," Luna announced that Sunday morning. She stood at the truck's service window holding a small bowl filled with what looked like liquid fire. "I call it hope sauce." The sauce was the color of sunset, deep orange with flecks of red that caught the light. Eli dipped a finger and tasted it. The flavor hit in waves. First, sweet, then smoky, then a heat that made his sinuses clear and his chest warm. But underneath it all was something else, something that tasted like his wife's voice, and Sunday mornings, and the garden they used to tend together. "This is incredible, Mija. How did you—" "It told me what it wanted to be," Luna said simply. Saul had been filming the whole time, of course. She'd been documenting everything since they'd found the truck, creating what she called their adventure videos on an old TikTok account she'd made with her school email. Most of her posts got 12 views, usually just from other kids in her class, but she kept making them anyway. "Can you make that sauce again?" Saul asked, holding up her tablet. "I think so, but it might be a little different next time. That's how food works. It's alive." Saul recorded Luna recreating the sauce, narrating the process in her matter-of-fact 6-year-old voice. "This is my sister Luna. She makes food that tastes like feelings. Today she's making hope sauce because our dad needs some hope." They posted the video at 2:17 p.m. on a Sunday. By Tuesday morning, it had 47,000 views. Eli first realized something had changed when he saw the line outside the junkyard. 15 people stood in the desert heat, checking their phones and looking expectantly at the truck. A woman with purple hair and food blog credentials hanging from her neck approached the service window. "Are you the hope sauce guy?" she asked. "I saw the video. Your daughter is amazing." Eli looked back at Luna, who was carefully spooning her latest batch of sauce into small containers they'd bought at the dollar store. Saul sat cross-legged on the floor, reading comments on her tablet with the focus of a day trader watching stock prices. "We're not really open yet," Eli said. "We don't have permits or—" "I don't care about permits," Purple Hair said. "I care about that sauce. My followers are going crazy. How much?" They sold out in an hour. Luna's Hope Sauce, ladled over gas station hot dogs and served with smiles, earned them $127, more money than they'd seen in weeks. But more than that, it earned them something Eli hadn't felt in months: the possibility that tomorrow might be different than today. "Dad, look!" Saul called from inside the truck. She'd been exploring while they served customers, and she'd found something wedged under a loose floorboard near the driver's seat. It was a leather-bound notebook, its pages covered in maps and symbols and what looked like a code. The maps showed routes through New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, dozens of stops marked with symbols Eli didn't recognize. Some pages had recipes, but written in shorthand that made no sense. Others had notes about dates, times, and cryptic references to safe houses and, quote, sanctuary stops. "What do you think it means?" Saul asked. Eli studied a map of Albuquerque. Several locations were marked with a symbol that looked like a chili pepper, surrounded by stars. One of them was only a few miles away, in a part of town he knew well. "I think," Eli said slowly, "Uncle Ernie was running more than just a food truck." That evening, a woman named Maya Anwar sent them a direct message through TikTok. Her profile showed she was a freelance journalist who wrote about food culture and immigration. Her message was simple, but intriguing. "Hi, I saw your daughter's video. I'm researching underground food networks from the 1980s in the Southwest. Your truck looks familiar. Would love to talk. I think your uncle might have been part of something important." Saul showed the message to Eli while Luna worked on her third experimental batch of the day, something she was calling "Tomorrow Tastes Better Sauce." "Should we talk to her?" Saul asked. Eli looked around the truck, at the mysterious maps, the coded recipes, the faded neon paint that seemed to glow with secrets. His daughters were asleep now, curled up in the booth where customers used to sit decades ago. Luna clutched her stuffed rabbit, and Saul had one arm thrown protectively around her sister even in sleep. 3 days ago, they'd been homeless. Now they had a truck, a following, and apparently a legacy he didn't understand. The smart thing would be to stay quiet, keep their heads down, focus on making enough money to rent a real apartment. But something about Maya's message, something about the careful way she'd phrased it, made him curious. "Yeah," he told Saul, "let's talk to her." The next morning brought another line of customers and another day of sold-out sauces. But it also brought a sleek black sedan that parked across the street from the junkyard. The driver never got out, never approached the truck. He just sat there, watching until they closed for the day. Saul noticed first. She always noticed everything. "Dad," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "That car's been there for 3 hours. Eli looked over. The sedan's windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but he could feel eyes on them, on his daughters. "Pack up the sauces," he said quietly. "We're done for today." As they drove away in the truck, Eli had managed to get it running, barely. The sedan followed at a distance. It only turned away when they reached the main road, disappearing into traffic like it had never been there at all. That night, as the twins slept in the truck's tiny booth, Eli stared at Uncle Ernie's notebook and wondered what kind of inheritance he'd really received. Maya Anwar arrived at the junkyard the next morning, carrying coffee and questions. She was younger than Eli had expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and the kind of intense curiosity that made her eyes bright even in the desert glare. "Your daughters are incredible," she said, watching Luna carefully measure spices into small containers, while Saul managed their growing TikTok account. "But I'm really here about this truck." She pulled out a manila folder thick with photographs and photocopied documents. "I've been researching what I call the ghost routes, a network of food trucks that operated throughout the Southwest in the 1980s. They served immigrant communities, undocumented workers, anyone who couldn't access traditional restaurants or grocery stores." Eli studied the photographs. Food trucks painted in bright colors. Crowds of families gathered around makeshift tables in parking lots and abandoned lots. And there, in several photos, was Uncle Ernie, younger, broader, with the same stubborn jaw Eli saw in the mirror every morning. Ernesto Mendoza was one of the original route runners, Maya continued. These trucks weren't just serving food, they were providing community support, mobile mutual aid networks, safe spaces. Why did they disappear? Saul asked, looking up from her tablet. She'd been listening while managing their social media, multitasking with the efficiency of her generation. Maya's expression darkened. Gentrification. Immigration crackdowns. Corporate pressure. By the early 90s, most of the original operators had been shut down or forced out. Your uncle was one of the last to keep running. She pulled out a map that looked almost identical to the ones in Ernie's notebook. These symbols mark the stops. Each one was a community gathering point, places where people could get affordable food, exchange information, sometimes hide from immigration raids. Luna appeared at Eli's shoulder, studying the map with the same intensity she brought to her spice combinations. This one looks like a flower, she said, pointing to a symbol that resembled a stylized marigold. Mommy used to grow flowers like this. Marigolds, Maya said softly. They were code for safe houses, places where families could stay if they were running from something. Eli felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. You think Uncle Ernie was running safe houses? I think your uncle was doing whatever needed to be done to take care of people who had nowhere else to go. Maya traced one of the routes with her finger. The question is, do you want to know the whole story? That afternoon, they decided to test Maya's theory. Using Ernie's notebook, they drove to one of the marked locations, a small parking lot behind a community center in the Barelas neighborhood. According to the map, it had been a regular stop on the route. When they pulled up and opened the truck service window, the response was immediate. Within minutes, families began appearing from nearby apartments and houses. Older women who spoke in rapid Spanish and seemed to recognize something about the truck. Teenage boys who helped translate for their grandparents. Children who pressed their faces against the window to watch Luna work. Is la nieta de Ernesto? One elderly woman asked Maya, who nodded toward Luna. She wants to know if Luna is Ernie's granddaughter, Maya translated. His great-niece, Eli replied. The woman smiled and said something else in Spanish, then pressed a crumpled $5 bill into Luna's hand and pointed at her heart. She says Luna has the gift, Maya translated. She says she can taste the love. They served until they ran out of food. Luna's hope sauce spooned over tacos, hot dogs, anything people brought from nearby shops. Sol documented everything, interviewing customers in her careful English, while Maya provided translation. The interaction felt natural, organic, like something that had been waiting to happen. But as the sun set and the crowd began to thin, Eli noticed the black sedan again. This time, it wasn't alone. 2 more identical cars had joined it, parked at different points around the neighborhood, like they were monitoring escape routes. We need to go, he told Maya quietly. She followed his gaze and her expression hardened. Corporate scouts, I've seen them before. They show up whenever an independent operation starts getting attention. As they packed up the truck, an older man approached the window. He was thin, weathered, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades of hard work. You are Ernesto's boy, he said in accented English. It wasn't a question. His nephew, Eli replied. The man nodded and glanced around, noting the sedans. Be careful. Some people, they don't like what your uncle was doing. They don't like what you're doing now. What were we doing? Eli asked. I don't even understand what this is yet. The man smiled sadly. You are feeding people who are hungry. In this country, sometimes that is revolutionary. He pressed something into Eli's hand, a small metal pin shaped like a marigold. From your uncle. He would want you to have it. As they drove away, the sedans followed at a distance, just like before. But this time, Eli wasn't afraid. Luna was creating something new in the back, a sauce she called Brave Taste. And Saul was editing video footage that would later get shared thousands of times. Maya, Eli said as they navigated through evening traffic, you said you were researching the ghost routes. How did you know to look for our truck? Maya was quiet for a long moment. Because 20 years ago, when I was 7 years old, my family was hiding from immigration enforcement. We had nowhere to go, no money for food. And one night, a food truck with neon paint, and a man who looked like you showed up in our neighborhood. He gave us free meals for a week until my parents found work. She turned to look at the twins, who were busy with their respective projects in the back of the truck. Your uncle saved my family. Now your daughters are carrying on his work, and they don't even know it yet. That night, they parked the truck in a different lot, one of Ernie's old safe stops, according to the notebook. As the twins slept, Eli studied the maps and felt the weight of inheritance settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a food truck. It was a responsibility, a legacy, a promise his uncle had made to people who had nowhere else to turn. Tomorrow, Maya had suggested they visit someone who might help them understand the full scope of what they'd inherited. An old woman named Xiomara Peña, who ran a bakery in Las Cruces and had been one of Ernie's closest allies during the Ghost Routes era. But tonight, as Eli listened to his daughters breathe softly in the desert darkness, he wondered if he was strong enough to carry the weight of other people's hopes, along with his own family's survival. The black sedans were gone now, but he knew they'd be back. Whatever they'd started with Luna's sauce and Saul's videos, it was bigger than just a family trying to make ends meet. It was part of something that stretched back decades, something that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to surface again. Eli closed his eyes and tried to imagine what Uncle Ernie would tell him to do. In the distance, a coyote howled at the desert stars, and the truck's old refrigerator hummed a lullaby that sounded like home. The drive to Las Cruces took them through desert that seemed to stretch forever, past billboards in Spanish and English that promised better lives just around the next bend. Luna slept against the window while Sol worked on her tablet, editing their latest video footage from yesterday's stop that had already gained 30,000 views overnight. "Tell me about Xiomara," Eli said to Maya, who rode in the passenger seat with Uncle Ernie's notebook spread across her lap. "She's been running Corazon Bakery for 47 years. Started it with her husband after they crossed from Chihuahua with nothing but a sourdough starter and a dream." Maya traced one of the routes in the notebook. During the Ghost Routes era, her bakery was headquarters. She fed the route runners, provided meeting space, helped coordinate safe stops. And she knew my uncle well? Better than anyone, I think. They had a falling out in the mid-90s, something about whether to go underground completely or try to work within the system. Ernie chose the shadows. Xiomara chose to stay visible, keep fighting in the open. The bakery sat on a corner lot in Mesilla, its adobe walls painted the color of sunset. Hand-painted signs in the windows advertised fresh tortillas and pan dulce, while the smell of yeast and cinnamon drifted into the street like a promise. When they pulled up in the food truck, an elderly woman emerged from the doorway, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. Xiomara Peña was barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like she owned the world. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing as they studied the truck, then Eli's face, then the twins who were climbing out of the back. "Dios mío," she whispered, "you look just like him at that age." She embraced Eli like he was a son coming home from war, then knelt to Luna's level. "And you, Pequeña, you are the one with the magic hands, no?" Luna nodded shyly, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Show me," Xiomara said simply. Inside the bakery, Luna worked with ingredients Xiomara provided. Dried chilies from her own garden, chocolate that had been ground that morning, spices in unmarked jars that filled the air with complexity. Saul documented everything while Maya and Eli watched Luna create something that made everyone in the room go quiet. "Como?" Xiomara asked, tasting Luna's latest creation, a mole that somehow captured the essence of rain on desert stone. "She says the food tells her what it wants to be," Saul explained, looking up from her filming. Xiomara nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Your uncle had this gift too, but different. He could taste memories and food, taste the stories. Your daughter, she tastes the future." They spent the afternoon in Xiomara's kitchen while she shared stories that weren't in any official histories. The Ghost Routes hadn't just been about food. They'd been about survival, resistance, community care when the systems failed. Route runners carried more than meals. They carried messages, money, medicine, hope. "The government didn't like us," Xiomara explained while teaching Luna how to balance sweet and heat in traditional sauces. "We were too independent, too connected. Hard to control people when they have their own networks, their own ways of taking care of each other." "What happened to the other runners?" Eli asked. Xiomara's face darkened. Some gave up, some got arrested on made-up charges, some just disappeared. She pulled out a photo album filled with pictures from the Ghost Routes era. Eli recognized his uncle in many of them, younger, laughing, surrounded by families and other food truck operators. But one photo made him stop. A woman with Luna's eyes and Saul's serious expression stood beside Uncle Ernie, both of them wearing matching aprons that read, "Alimentamos la revolución, we feed the revolution." "Who is this?" Eli asked. "Carmen Reyes, your uncle's partner, in business and in life. She was the real genius behind the routes, could cook anything, organize everything, see 3 moves ahead of everyone else." Saul looked up from her tablet, where she'd been cross-referencing faces in the photos with social media profiles. "What happened to her?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Xiomara was quiet for a long moment. Official story, she moved to Mexico in 1994, wanted to be closer to family. Real story, she shrugged. Carmen was getting too much attention from people who didn't like what she represented. Independent, successful, refused to be controlled. One day she was here, next day she wasn't. Luna had been listening while she worked, and now she looked up from a sauce that smelled like memories. Was she scared? Carmen? No, mija. Carmen was never scared. But she was careful. She knew when to step back, when to let someone else carry the torch. Xiomara went to an old safe behind the counter and pulled out a manila envelope sealed with wax. "Your uncle left this for whoever came looking, said it was for the next generation of troublemakers." Inside were documents, incorporation papers for something called the Desert Rose Foundation, bank account information, and a letter in Uncle Ernie's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, it means you found the truck and figured out it's more than just a way to sell tacos. The routes are yours now, but remember, this was never about the money. It was about feeding people who were hungry, sheltering people who were scared, connecting people who were alone. The network is still out there, waiting. Some of the old stops are gone, but new ones appear where they're needed. Trust the food. Trust your daughters. Trust the community. And whatever you do, don't let them turn what we built into just another business. Ehem. There's more, Trade Xiomara said, watching Eli read. The foundation isn't empty. Your uncle, he saved money for years, invested it carefully. There's enough there to buy proper permits, upgrade equipment, maybe even purchase some of the old route stops that are for sale. Saul was doing calculations on her tablet. How much? Enough to change your lives, enough to restart the whole network if you wanted to. Xiomara's expression grew serious. But money brings attention, and attention brings people who want to control what you're doing. As if summoned by her words, Saul's tablet chimed with a notification. Their TikTok account had gained 10,000 new followers overnight, and there were dozens of direct messages from food bloggers, investors, and media companies wanting to, quote, partner with them. One message stood out. From an account with a sleek corporate logo, Zeke Morello, CEO of Southwestern Authentic Foods. Love what you're doing with traditional flavors. Let's talk about opportunities that could benefit everyone. Who's Zeke Morello? Eli asked. Maya's face went pale. Big corporate food guy. He's been buying up independent restaurants and food trucks all over the Southwest, turning them into franchises. Claims he's preserving authentic culture, but really he's packaging it for suburban consumers. Xiomara spat in Spanish, then switched to English. Buitre, vulture. He circled your uncle for years, trying to buy him out. Ernie always said Morello was the kind of man who would steal the recipe for your grandmother's love and sell it back to you in a plastic bottle. They spent the evening planning. Using Uncle Ernie's maps and Xiomara's knowledge, they identified 12 active route stops between Albuquerque and El Paso, places where the truck could still serve communities that needed it. But they also had to consider the growing online attention, the corporate interest, and the mysterious black sedans that seemed to appear wherever they went. You have a choice to make, Xiomara told Eli as they prepared to leave. You can play it safe, keep the truck small, stay under the radar, serve your community quietly. Or you can embrace what your daughters have started, grow this thing into what it could be, and accept that growth means risk. Luna appeared at Eli's elbow, holding a small jar of the sauce she'd been perfecting all day. "This one tastes like choosing," she said seriously. "Choosing what?" he asked. "Choosing to be brave." That night, they parked the truck at a rest stop halfway home. The twins slept soundly, exhausted from a day of learning and creating. But Eli lay awake, staring at his phone screen where messages continued to pour in. Some offering help, others demanding pieces of what they were building. All of them representing paths forward he couldn't quite see the end of. Maya had given him her number and a promise to help navigate whatever came next. Xiomara had armed him with knowledge and resources he'd never expected to inherit. His daughters had shown him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in gifts you don't fully understand. But tomorrow would bring new choices, new pressure, new people who wanted to turn his family's survival story into something else entirely. Eli pulled out Uncle Ernie's notebook and wrote his first entry, Day 12 with the truck. "The girls are magic, the world is complicated, the food is honest. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, full of possibilities and dangers he couldn't name yet. The call came at 7:23 a.m., 2 days after they returned from Las Cruces. Eli was helping Luna organize spices in the truck, while Saul managed their increasingly hectic social media presence. They were up to 150,000 followers and counting, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mendoza, this is Zeke Morello. I've been following your daughter's incredible journey online. I'd love to meet and discuss how we might work together." The voice was warm, confident, the kind of smooth professionalism that made million-dollar deals sound like friendly conversations, but something about it made Eli's skin crawl. "I'm not sure we're looking for partners," Eli replied carefully. Of course. I completely understand, but I think you might be interested in what I have to offer. I'm talking about real resources, Mr. Mendoza. The kind of support that could take your daughters' talents nationwide. Could I buy you lunch? Just a conversation between entrepreneurs." Eli looked at Luna, who was carefully labeling jars with her own phonetic spelling, and Sol, who was responding to comments with the diplomatic skill of a UN ambassador. They'd been running the truck for 3 weeks now, serving communities throughout Albuquerque and barely making enough to cover gas and ingredients. The Desert Rose Foundation account Xiomara had mentioned would help, but Eli hadn't touched it yet. It felt like stealing from Uncle Ernie's ghost. "Where did you want to meet?" he heard himself saying. Zeke Morello suggested the Andaluz Hotel in Old Town, the kind of place where lunch cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Eli arrived in his cleanest jeans and the button-down shirt he'd worn to Maria's funeral 3 years ago, feeling like an imposter among the business-casual crowd. Morello was easy to spot. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a casual blazer that probably cost more than Eli made in a month. He stood up as Eli approached, extending a hand and a smile that seemed genuine enough. "Elijah, thank you for coming. I've been watching your daughter's videos obsessively. That little Luna of yours, she's got something special." They sat at a table overlooking the courtyard, where tourists photographed adobe walls and bought mass-produced, authentic New Mexican crafts from gift shops. Morello ordered wine with lunch, spoke knowledgeably about regional cuisine, and generally seemed like the kind of person who'd taken the time to do his homework. "I want to be transparent with you," Morello said after their food arrived. "I've built my career on identifying authentic voices in the food world and helping them reach bigger audiences. Your daughters have that rare combination of natural talent and genuine charm that can't be manufactured." "They're 6 years old," Eli said. "Exactly! They're unfiltered, unspoiled by the industry. Do you know what I could do with that authenticity?" Morello pulled out an iPad and showed Eli mock-ups of branded packaging, merchandise designs, and what looked like the blueprints for a restaurant chain. Root Revival, that's what we'd call it. Luna's sauces in every grocery store in America. Saul as the face of a kids' cooking show. Franchised food trucks in every major city, all serving traditional family recipes with that Mendoza magic. The numbers he quoted made Eli dizzy. $2 million up front, plus royalties, plus equity stakes in future expansions. Enough money to buy a house, send the girls to college, never worry about medical bills or grocery money again. "What would you need from us?" Eli asked. "Creative control, of course. Brand management. We'd need to trademark the recipes, standardize production processes, maybe tone down some of the more political elements of your social media presence. Political elements? Morello's smile flickered slightly. Well, some of your recent posts about serving immigrant communities, the references to your uncles, ghost roots, that's beautiful for the backstory. But we'd want to keep the focus on family, tradition, the American dream, less emphasis on division. Eli thought about the families who lined up at their community stops, the elderly woman who'd pressed money into Luna's hand and called her blessed, the teenagers who translated for their grandparents and stayed to help serve other customers. Those aren't political elements, Eli said slowly. That's just who we serve. Right. And we'd still serve everyone, of course. We just package it in a way that appeals to the broadest possible audience. Morello pulled up social media analytics on his tablet. You're getting incredible engagement, but look at the demographics. Lots of interaction from advocacy groups, immigrant rights organizations, food justice activists. That's a niche market, Elijah. I'm talking about mainstream America, suburban families who want to feel good about supporting authentic culture without getting uncomfortable about the politics. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Morello had done his research. He knew about Uncle Ernie's history, the Ghost Routes Network, even Ziomara's bakery. He presented it all as romantic heritage, the kind of colorful backstory that would look great on packaging and marketing materials. Your uncle was ahead of his time, Morello said over coffee. He had the right instincts but lacked the resources to scale properly. We could honor his legacy by taking his vision nationwide. What happens to our truck, our route stops? We'd incorporate them into the brand, of course. Maybe create a heritage route, experience for food tourists. Turn some of those old stops into themed restaurants. Your daughters could be the faces of the whole operation. Eli imagined Luna and Sol's faces on billboards, their voices in commercial jingles, their recipes mass-produced in factories and stripped of everything that made them special. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, take all the time you need. But Elijah, opportunities like this don't come along often. Your daughters have lightning in a bottle right now. Internet fame is fleeting. We need to capture this moment while the magic is still fresh. The drive back to the truck felt like surfacing from deep water. Eli found the girls where he'd left them, parked behind a community center in the International District, serving lunch to a line of construction workers, office employees, and families with children who watched Luna work, with the reverence usually reserved for magicians. How'd it go, Dad? Sol asked, not looking up from her tablet where she was processing payment through their Venmo account. He offered us a lot of money. How much? Sol was always practical about numbers. When Eli told her, Sol's eyes went wide. Luna looked up from the sauce she was stirring, confused by the sudden tension in her father's voice. What would we have to do? Sol asked. Give up control. Let them turn your sauces into products they can sell everywhere, make you both into characters, I guess. Luna scrunched up her face. Like on TV? Something like that. Would we still get to make food for people who are hungry? The question hit Eli like a physical blow. In all of Morello's presentations, all his talk about scaling and demographics and market penetration, he'd never once mentioned feeding hungry people. It had all been about capturing audiences, building brands, maximizing profit potential. I don't think so, Mija, not the way we do now. Luna nodded seriously and went back to stirring her sauce. Then I don't want to be a character. I want to be Luna who makes food that tastes like feelings. That evening, Eli called Morello back and declined the offer. The businessman's response was gracious, professional, and somehow threatening all at once. I understand completely, Elijah, family first, right? But if you change your mind, and I hope you will, the offer stands. The market won't wait forever, though. There are other talented families out there, other authentic stories to tell. It would be a shame to see your daughters. Moment pass them by. After he hung up, Eli sat in the truck's driver's seat and watched his daughters work. Luna was teaching a customer's young daughter how to smell spices properly, while Sol documented the interaction for their social media. They were completely absorbed in what they were doing, unaware that someone had just tried to buy their souls for $2 million. Eli's phone buzzed with a text from Maya, heard through the grapevine that Morello made you an offer. Hope you told him where to stick it. These corporate guys don't give up easy. Be careful. Then another text, this one from an unknown number. Saw your truck today. Impressive operation. Shame if something happened to disrupt it. Health inspectors can be so picky about food truck violations. Eli deleted the second message immediately, but the chill it sent down his spine lingered long into the night. He'd turned down enough money to change their lives forever, and now someone wanted to make sure he regretted it. Outside the truck, the desert wind howled like a warning, and Eli found himself missing Uncle Ernie more than ever. Whatever battles his uncle had fought to protect the ghost routes, it seemed like those same fights were just beginning for the next generation. The health inspector arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, before they'd even finished setting up for the morning rush. Eli was checking propane connections while the twins organized their station when a stern-faced woman in a county uniform approached with a clipboard and an attitude that suggested she'd already found them guilty of something. "Routine inspection," she announced, though nothing about her presence felt routine. "I'm going to need everyone to stop what they're doing while I examine your equipment and processes." Inspector Rodriguez spent 3 hours going through every inch of the truck with a magnifying glass and a measuring tape, documenting violations that ranged from questionable to absurd. The hand sanitizer dispenser was mounted half an inch too low. Their thermometer was calibrated correctly but lacked a specific certification sticker they'd never heard of. The truck's gray water tank needed a permit they hadn't known existed. 67 violations, she announced finally, handing Eli a citation that was longer than most novels. "You have 30 days to address all issues or face permanent closure and potential criminal charges." Saul, who had been quietly filming the entire inspection with her tablet, looked up from reviewing the footage. "Dad, she measured the same sink 3 different times and got 3 different measurements." "Equipment malfunction," Rodriguez replied without looking at Saul. "Happens all the time." After she left, Eli stared at the citation and felt his chest tighten. The fines alone would cost more than they'd made in their best week. The required upgrades and certifications would take months and thousands of dollars they didn't have. It was designed to shut them down. "This is because you said no to Mr. Morello, isn't it?" Saul asked. Eli wanted to protect his daughters from that kind of cynicism, but Saul was too smart and too observant to accept comfortable lies. "Probably." "So what do we do?" Before Eli could answer, Maya's van pulled up beside the truck. She climbed out looking grim, carrying a folder thick with documents and bad news. "I heard about the inspection," she said. "Rodriguez has been hitting independent food trucks all over the city. Always the same violations, always the same 30-day deadline. 3 other trucks have been shut down this month." "Let me guess, they all turned down deals with corporate partners?" "Bingo." Maya opened her folder. "I've been investigating Rodriguez. She's been county inspector for 12 years, but her violation rates have tripled in the past 6 months. Always targeting trucks that serve immigrant communities or have viral social media presence." Saul was still reviewing her footage of the inspection. "Dad, look at this." She showed them a clip where Rodriguez was clearly using a bent measuring tape to make their prep counter appear non-compliant. "She cheated." "Can we prove it?" Eli asked. "Maybe, but that's not our biggest problem right now." Maya pulled out a newspaper clipping. 3 days ago, a food truck in Phoenix was firebombed after its owner refused to sell to a restaurant group. Last week, a truck in Tucson had its tires slashed and its water tank contaminated. Someone is sending a message to independent operators. Eli felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his chest. 3 weeks ago, his biggest worry had been finding enough money for gas. Now he was apparently part of some larger conflict he didn't understand, and his daughters were in the crossfire. "Maybe we should take the deal," he said quietly. "No," Saul's voice was firm, surprising him. "We can't let them win. It's not about winning, Mija. It's about keeping you and Luna safe." Saul looked at him with Maria's eyes and Maria's stubborn chin. "Mom wouldn't have given up." The words hit harder than Rodriguez's citation. Maria had fought hospital administrators and insurance companies and doctors who wanted to give up on her treatment. She'd fought for every extra day with her family, every moment of normal life, every small victory against systems that seemed designed to crush hope. "Your mom also didn't have people threatening to firebomb her workplace," Eli replied. But even as he said it, he knew Saul was right. Maria would have found a way to fight back. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a police car. Detective Orlando Ruiz climbed out, a tall, lean man in his 40s with prematurely gray hair and laugh lines that suggested he'd seen enough of the world to find it both tragic and amusing. Mr. Mendoza, I heard you had some excitement this morning. Mind if we talk? Ruiz had been investigating the recent attacks on independent food trucks, and he'd noticed patterns that suggested coordination rather than random vandalism. More importantly, he'd grown up in the neighborhoods the ghost routes used to serve. I ate from your uncle's truck when I was a kid, he told Eli. Best tacos in the city. But that's not why people loved Ernie. He showed up during the hard times. When families got evicted, when immigration raids hit the neighborhood, when people had nowhere else to turn, there was always Ernie with food and a place to sit and someone who'd listen to your problems. You knew about the ghost routes? Ruiz smiled. Kid, half the cops in the city knew about the ghost routes. We just looked the other way because Ernie and his crew were doing more to keep communities safe than we ever could. He pulled out a file folder. These attacks on food trucks? They're not random. Someone is systematically targeting independent operators who serve immigrant communities or have strong social media presence. The pattern suggests corporate sponsorship, someone with resources and connections. Zeke Morello, Maya said. Can't prove it yet, but Morello's company has made offers to purchase every truck that's been attacked. Always right after they refuse his initial buyout proposal. Ruiz looked at Eli seriously. You declined his offer yesterday. Today you get hit with a bogus inspection. Tomorrow, who knows? Saul had been quiet during this conversation, but now she looked up from her tablet with the expression she got when she'd figured out a puzzle that had been bothering her. Detective Ruiz? What if we could prove the inspection was fake? She showed them the footage she'd compiled. Rodriguez using bent measuring tools, citing violations that didn't exist in the actual health code, claiming equipment failures for devices that were working perfectly. Saul had cross-referenced every violation against the actual county regulations and found dozens of discrepancies. This is good work, Ruiz said, studying the footage. But Rodriguez will claim the video was edited, that you're trying to frame her. We need more evidence. What if we got her to do it again? Saul asked. But this time with witnesses. The plan they developed was risky but simple. Saul would leak information through social media that they were planning a big community event at one of Uncle Ernie's old route stops. If Rodriguez showed up to sabotage them again, they'd be ready with cameras, witnesses, and legal observers who could document everything properly. You sure about this? Eli asked his daughters that evening as they prepared for what might be their last week of operation. Luna was working on a new sauce she called Fighting Back flavor, something with smoky heat and an aftertaste that lingered like determination. The food wants us to keep going, Daddy. It told me so. Saul looked up from her tablet, where she was coordinating with food justice activists and community organizers who'd volunteered to help. Besides, we're not just fighting for us anymore. All those other trucks, all those families who depend on independent operators, they're counting on us to prove this can be beaten. Eli looked around the truck that had changed their lives. At Uncle Ernie's map still taped to the walls, at the spice jars Luna had organized with scientific precision, at Saul's camera equipment, and the mountain of supportive messages from followers who saw their story as something bigger than just another viral food trend. They were right, of course. This wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about all the families who needed affordable food, cultural connection, and community spaces that couldn't be bought or franchised or sanitized for mass consumption. Okay, he said, let's fight back. Outside, the desert wind carried the smell of rain that might or might not come, and Eli found himself thinking about Uncle Ernie's letter. Trust the food. Trust your daughters. Trust the community. Tomorrow, they'd find out if trust was enough to beat money and power and people who thought everything authentic could be bought and sold. But tonight, Luna's latest sauce tasted like revolution, and that felt like enough hope to carry them through whatever was coming next. The rally that formed around #SaveRoute Revival gave Eli an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Instead of waiting for the next attack, they'd go on offense, hitting every single location on Uncle Ernie's route maps, serving communities that hadn't seen a ghost route truck in 20 years, and documenting everything to show the world what they were really fighting to protect. It's like a farewell tour, Saul explained to their growing online audience, except we're not saying goodbye, we're saying hello again. They started at dawn on a Wednesday, the truck loaded with ingredients for Luna's expanding sauce collection and enough supplies to feed small armies. Maya had recruited a documentary crew, film students from UNM who worked for credit and believed in the cause. Detective Ruiz provided unofficial security, following at a distance in his personal vehicle during off-duty hours. The first stop was a trailer park in Rio Rancho where Uncle Ernie's map showed a marigold symbol, one of the safe house markers Yomara had explained. When they pulled up, Eli wasn't sure anyone would remember or care about an old food truck route from decades past. He was wrong. Within minutes of opening their service window, families began appearing from mobile homes and apartments, drawn by some invisible network of communication that moved faster than social media. Elderly women who spoke in rapid Spanish and seemed to recognize something essential about the truck. Middle-aged men who translated for their mothers and stayed to help serve other customers. Children who pressed their faces against the serving window to watch Luna work with the focus of scientists observing a miracle. That's the official story. Carlos glanced around, then leaned closer to Sol's camera. But I'll tell you what I think. I think Carmen is still out there, still cooking, still taking care of people who need it. Maybe not under her own name, maybe not in the spotlight, but women like Carmen don't just disappear. They adapt, they survive, they find new ways to feed the revolution. The third stop was supposed to be a migrant worker camp outside Española, but when they arrived, they found empty fields and a for sale sign planted where the camp entrance used to be. Development had claimed another piece of the original route network. Sa was documenting the empty space when her tablet chimed with an urgent notification. Someone had posted a video response to their #PayWithSmiles campaign, a professionally produced piece that used their own footage but with a very different narrative. "Look at this," Sol said, showing the screen to Eli and Maya. The video was titled Exploitation or Empowerment and featured Zeke Morello speaking directly to the camera with concerned, paternal authority. He praised Luna's talent and Sol's entrepreneurship, but questioned whether they were being appropriately protected by adults who might be exploiting their innocence for activist purposes. "These are beautiful children with extraordinary gifts," Morello said in the video. "But are we really helping them by encouraging a lifestyle of financial instability and potential danger? Wouldn't it be more responsible to provide them with proper business training, professional development, and the security that comes with legitimate corporate partnership?" The video had been shared thousands of times in just 2 hours, with comments ranging from supportive to vicious. Some viewers accused Eli of using his daughters as political props. Others questioned whether the family was properly licensed, insured, or following child labor laws. "He's trying to turn our story against us," Maya said, reading through the comment thread, making it look like exploitation instead of empowerment. Sol was quiet for a long moment, studying the video with the analytical intensity she brought to everything that confused or challenged her. "Dad," she said finally, "what if we showed them Carmen?" "What do you mean?" "Carlos said Carmen is probably still out there, still cooking. What if we found her? What if we proved that the ghost routes weren't just about the past, that they're still happening, still necessary?" Eli looked at his daughters. Luna absorbed in creating another sauce inspired by the empty fields around them, Sol already researching potential leads on her cracked tablet screen, and felt a familiar combination of pride and terror that seemed to define modern parenting. They were right, of course. Finding Carmen would prove that the Ghost Routes network had never really died, just evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. It would show the world that their movement was part of something larger and older and more important than viral marketing or corporate buyouts. But it would also mean going deeper into a mystery that had already attracted dangerous attention, pursuing someone who'd spent decades staying hidden for reasons they didn't fully understand. "Okay," Eli said, watching Luna taste her latest creation, something she called finding what's lost sauce that somehow captured the flavor of hope mixed with uncertainty. "Let's find Carmen." That night, they parked at a truck stop outside Santa Fe and planned their next moves. Sol had already found 3 possible leads through social media cross-referencing and Maya's journalist contacts. Luna had created a special sauce she insisted they save for Carmen, something she called Welcome Home, that tasted like recognition and reunion, and all the meals that had been waiting 20 years to be shared. Outside their windows, other travelers moved through the fluorescent-lit night, truckers and families and people chasing dreams or running from nightmares. The same kinds of people Uncle Ernie had served. the same communities that still needed spaces where they could find dignity, connection, and food that tasted like someone cared about their stories. Tomorrow, they'd start searching for a woman who'd helped create all of this, then disappeared into legend and rumor and the kind of careful invisibility that kept dangerous people safe. But tonight, Luna's latest sauce tasted like discovery, and that felt like enough magic to carry them through whatever they might find. The address Saul found led them to a small adobe house in Flagstaff, Arizona, tucked behind a community garden where tomatoes and chilies grew in neat rows that spoke of experienced hands and patient attention. The mailbox read C. Rivera, which might or might not mean anything, but the smell drifting from the backyard, complex layers of roasted peppers and chocolate and spices that made Luna's nose twitch with recognition, suggested they'd found the right place. Carmen Reyes answered the door before they knocked, as if she'd been watching from the window and already knew why they'd come. She was smaller than she'd appeared in Uncle Ernie's photographs, her black hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes held the same intensity Eli recognized from pictures of the original Ghost Route era. "You look like him," she said simply, studying Eli's face. "But you have her hands." She gestured toward Luna, who was clutching her jar of welcome home sauce with nervous excitement. "You knew we were coming?" Carmen smiled, expression that transformed her entire face and made her look decades younger. "Mija, I've been following your videos since the first one went viral. When Saul started researching my name online, it wasn't hard to figure out you'd eventually find your way here." She led them through a house that felt like a museum of Southwestern food culture. Cast iron pans seasoned to black perfection, mortars and pestles carved from volcanic rock, spice collections that filled entire walls with jars labeled in Spanish, English, and what looked like Carmen's personal shorthand. "I knew your uncle for 32 years, Carmen said, settling them around a kitchen table worn smooth by decades of use. "We started the Ghost Routes together because we saw families going hungry while perfectly good food got thrown away, saw communities getting scattered while developers got rich, saw culture getting packaged and sold back to the people who'd created it." Luna offered her jar of sauce with the solemnity of someone presenting a diplomatic gift. Carmen accepted it with equal gravity, opening the lid and breathing in the complex layers Luna had somehow captured. "Dios mío," Carmen whispered, tasting it with the tip of her finger. "This child has the gift. Real gift, not just talent." "What's the difference?" Saul asked, filming the interaction with her tablet. "Talent is something you learn, something you practice until you get good at it. Gift is something that chooses you, something that flows through you from places you can't name." Carmen studied Luna with the attention of someone who recognized a kindred spirit. "This sauce tastes like homecoming, like all the meals we've been waiting 20 years to share together." She disappeared into her pantry and returned with ingredients Eli couldn't identify. Dried peppers that looked like they'd been aged in wine barrels, chocolate that smelled like earth and rain, spices that seemed to shimmer with their own light. "Show me," she said to Luna. "Show me how you listen to the food." What followed was less cooking lesson than spiritual ceremony. Luna worked with Carmen's ingredients the same way she worked with everything, touching, smelling, tasting, letting some internal compass guide her decisions about what belonged together and what didn't. But Carmen was different from other adults who'd watched Luna work. She didn't ask questions or offer suggestions. She just observed, occasionally nodding approval or making small adjustments that somehow made Luna's instincts stronger and clearer. "She's been waiting for a teacher," Saul said quietly, recording everything. "And I've been waiting for a student," Carmen replied. "Your uncle and I, we could never have children of our own. The work was too dangerous, too uncertain, but we always hoped someone would come along who could carry the traditions forward." "Why did you disappear?" Eli asked. Carmen's expression grew distant. In 1994, 3 food truck operators in Phoenix were arrested on trumped-up charges: tax evasion, health code violations, immigration status issues. All 3 had refused to sell their routes to corporate buyers. The message was clear: cooperate or face consequences. She pulled out a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings, legal documents, and photographs from the period when the original ghost routes were being systematically dismantled. Ernesto wanted to fight it in court, prove the arrests were politically motivated. "I wanted to go underground completely, operate in secret until the pressure passed. We couldn't agree on strategy, so we split up. He kept the truck in the visible network. I disappeared and kept the invisible one running." "Invisible network?" Maya asked. Carmen smiled. "You think your uncle was the only one feeding forgotten communities? Mija, there are dozens of us out here, maybe hundreds. Different names, different trucks, different routes, but the same mission. Show up where you're needed, feed people who are hungry, create space for community when the systems fail." She showed them maps that looked similar to Uncle Ernie's but covered different territories. Networks spanning from California to Texas, connecting communities that existed in the gaps between official recognition and corporate interest. "We learned to be smaller, quieter, more careful. Instead of one big operation that could be targeted, we became dozens of small ones that could adapt and survive. Some weeks I'm Carmen the tamale lady. Other weeks I'm Rosa, who sells elotes from a cart. Last month I spent 2 weeks cooking for a migrant worker camp that had been forgotten by everyone except ICE." Saul was taking notes with the intensity of a graduate student. "So the ghost routes never really ended?" "They evolved, got smarter. Your daughter's success online has been beautiful to watch, but it's also dangerous. Visibility brings opportunity, but it also brings people who want to control what you're doing." Carmen pulled out a laptop and showed them social media monitoring she'd been conducting. Zeke Morello's company had been systematically purchasing independent food operations throughout the Southwest, always following the same pattern: generous offers followed by regulatory pressure, followed by mysterious accidents or violations. "He's not just trying to buy your truck," Carmen explained. "He's trying to eliminate independent operators entirely. Create a monopoly on what people think authentic Southwestern food looks like." "How do we fight that?" Eli asked. "By proving authenticity can't be bought or franchised or mass-produced." Carmen looked at Luna, who had been quietly working with the ingredients while the adults talked. "Show them what you made, Pequeña." Luna had created something that defied easy description, a sauce that seemed to change flavor as you tasted it, starting with familiar comfort and evolving into complexity that spoke of generations of knowledge passed down through careful hands. "This is what they're trying to steal," Carmen said. "Not just recipes or techniques, but the culture that creates them. The relationships, the stories, the understanding that food is never just about food." She offered to teach them more, not just cooking techniques, but the underground networks that had kept communities fed when official systems failed. How to identify safe stops and trustworthy partners. How to stay invisible when necessary and visible when the community needed them to be. "But first, you need to understand what you're choosing," Carmen warned. "Once you go deeper into this network, you can't go back to just being a family with a food truck. You become part of something larger, something that powerful people want to control or destroy." Eli looked at his daughters. Luna was completely absorbed in her work, creating flavors that somehow captured the essence of connection and resistance. Saul was documenting everything with the dedication of someone who understood they were witnessing history being made. "What do you think?" he asked them. "I think," Luna said, not looking up from her sauce, "the food wants us to learn everything we can." Saul was more practical. "I think we need allies. And I think Carmen knows things we need to know if we're going to survive what's coming." That evening, Carmen prepared a meal that felt like initiation and celebration combined. Each dish told stories about the communities that had created it, the families who had passed down techniques through generations of careful practice, the resistance that happened every time someone chose to feed others instead of just feeding themselves. "There's something else," Carmen said over dessert, flan that somehow tasted like childhood memories and future possibilities. "The Southwest Food Truck Championship starts next month. Morello's company sponsors it, uses it as a recruiting ground for operations they want to acquire." She pulled out registration materials. "If you compete and win, you prove that authenticity beats corporate production. You show the world what real food culture looks like. But if you lose, or if something happens to prevent you from competing, Morello gets to control the narrative about who deserves to succeed in this industry." Saul was already calculating odds and strategies. "What would we need to do to win?" "Cook like your lives depend on it," Carmen said, "because they probably do." That night, they slept in Carmen's guest room, while desert winds howled outside and carried the scent of rain that might or might not come. Eli lay awake, wondering if they were making the right choice, if the fight was worth the risk, if his daughters deserved a simpler life without corporate enemies and underground networks, and the weight of carrying forward traditions they were only beginning to understand. But in the morning, Luna created a sauce she called Championship Dreams that tasted like determination and hope and all the meals that connected them to something larger than themselves. And Saul had already started planning their competition strategy, organizing their social media campaign, and researching every trick Morello might use to sabotage their chances. They were committed now, all the way in, ready to find out what happened when authenticity went head-to-head with corporate power on the biggest stage Southwestern food culture had to offer. The Southwest Food Truck Championship transformed the New Mexico State Fairgrounds into a temporary city of chrome and neon, where the smell of competing cuisines mixed with diesel exhaust and the nervous energy of operators who'd traveled hundreds of miles for their shot at recognition. 50 trucks had qualified for the 3-day competition, but everyone knew the real contest was between two very different visions of what authentic food culture should look like. On one side sat Zeke Morello's entry, a gleaming $200,000 mobile kitchen called Heritage Flavors that looked like it had been designed by aerospace engineers and food scientists. Everything about it screamed professional perfection, from the synchronized movements of its uniformly dressed staff to the precisely portioned samples they distributed to judges with the efficiency of a military operation. On the other side sat the Mendoza family's battered truck, still wearing Uncle Ernie's faded neon paint job and the accumulated character that came from months of serving real communities in real parking lots. Luna had painted new murals on the side panels, swirling patterns that somehow captured the essence of all the route stops they'd visited, all the stories they'd collected, all the connections they'd made. David versus Goliath, Maya observed, filming the setup process while Soul managed their social media presence and Luna organized spices with the focus of a general preparing for battle. The competition format was designed to test different aspects of food truck operation over 3 days. Day 1 judged technical skill and food safety. Day 2 measured creativity and customer service. Day 3 evaluated authenticity and cultural impact, categories that seemed designed to favor operations that could tell compelling stories about their heritage and community connections. Morello's team dominated Day 1 with clinical precision, serving perfectly executed versions of Southwestern classics to judges who awarded points for consistency, presentation, and adherence to health regulations. Their operation ran like clockwork. No wasted motion, no variation in portion size, no deviation from predetermined recipes that had been tested and refined in corporate test kitchens. The Mendoza family took a different approach. Luna created sauces throughout the day based on whoever happened to be watching, adjusting flavors for the elderly judge who needed less heat, adding complexity for the food blogger who appreciated unusual combinations, tailoring each sample to the individual rather than following standardized procedures. Inconsistent, one judge noted on his scorecard. Personal, Saul corrected, having overheard the comment while filming customer interactions. They finished Day 1 in 4th place, close enough to stay competitive, but far enough behind Morello's operation to make their path to victory uncertain. That evening, Detective Ruiz appeared at their truck with news that was both encouraging and terrifying. "We got Rodriguez," he announced, showing them arrest photos on his phone. "Your video evidence was enough to get a warrant for her records. Turns out she's been taking payments from restaurant consulting firms to target specific food trucks. The district attorney is calling it regulatory racketeering." "What about the other violations?" Eli asked. "All dismissed. You're officially in compliance with every health regulation in the state." Ruiz's expression grew serious. But Rodriguez was small time. "She's already talking, trying to reduce her charges by naming bigger players. This investigation is going to reach people who won't go quietly." As if summoned by his words, Zeke Morello himself appeared at their truck, carrying 2 cups of expensive coffee and wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from never doubting you'd get what you wanted. "Elijah, great work today. Your daughters are absolutely magical." He offered coffee that Eli didn't accept. "I wanted to congratulate you on making it this far. Really impressive for a family operation competing against professional teams." "Just here to cook," Eli replied carefully. Of course. But I hope you know that whatever happens in this competition, my offer still stands. We could do amazing things together. Take Luna's talents nationwide. Give Soul the platform she deserves. Think about their futures, Elijah. Think about college funds and healthcare, and all the security that comes with proper corporate backing. Luna appeared at the service window holding a small container of sauce she'd been experimenting with. "Would you like to try this?" she asked Morello, with the polite curiosity she showed all potential customers. Morello accepted the sample with practiced charm, tasting it while maintaining eye contact with Eli. But something shifted in his expression as the flavors registered: surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like fear. "What's in this?" he asked Luna. "Things that remember," Luna replied seriously, "and things that don't want to be owned." Morello's smile flickered. He thanked Luna for the sample, wished them luck in tomorrow's competition, and walked away with the kind of careful control that suggested he was working hard not to run. "What did you put in that sauce?" Saul asked her sister. "Truth," Luna replied. "It tastes different to different people, depending on what they're trying to hide." Day 2 brought equipment failures that seemed suspiciously coordinated. The truck's generator died just as morning service began. Their propane connection developed a mysterious leak that required emergency repairs. The point-of-sale system Saul had been using to process payments crashed repeatedly, forcing them to handle transactions with cash and apologies. But the community that had grown around their story showed up in force. Food bloggers who'd been following their journey documented every setback and recovery. Other food truck operators shared equipment and ingredients when supplies ran low. Customers who'd driven hours to taste Luna's cooking waited patiently through delays and technical difficulties. Most importantly, Carmen arrived with a van full of supplies and the kind of calm competence that came from decades of adapting to whatever circumstances demanded. "Having problems?" she asked, surveying their situation with professional assessment. "Nothing we can't handle," Eli replied, though he wasn't sure that was true. Carmen nodded and began unpacking equipment that looked older than Luna and Sol combined, but worked with the reliability of tools that had been cared for by people who understood their value. "Your uncle always said the best food comes from the worst circumstances," she told Luna while helping her organize a new workspace. "When everything goes wrong, that's when you find out what you're really made of." Luna created her most inspired work of the competition that day, turning equipment failures into opportunities for improvisation. When the main burner died, she developed a cold sauce that somehow captured the essence of fire without heat. When they ran out of traditional tortillas, she worked with Carmen to create wraps from ingredients they had on hand that Judge called innovatively authentic. Sol documented everything, turning their disasters into compelling social media content that showed resilience, creativity, and the kind of grace under pressure that couldn't be manufactured in corporate test kitchens. They finished Day 2 in second place, close enough to Morello's operation to make the final day a genuine contest. That evening, Ruiz returned with news that changed everything. The investigation expanded, he announced. "Rodriguez led us to consulting firms, which led us to shell companies, which led us to a pattern of systematic harassment targeting independent food operations throughout the Southwest. We've got enough evidence to file federal charges for racketeering and restraint of trade." He showed them documents that detailed the scope of the conspiracy. Dozens of food trucks pressured out of business, communities left without affordable food options, a deliberate effort to consolidate an entire regional food culture under corporate control. "Morello's company is at the center of all of it," Ruiz continued. "We're making arrests tomorrow, right after the competition ends. But there's something else you should know. We found evidence that suggests someone has been planning to sabotage tomorrow's final competition. We don't know exactly what, but you need to be ready for anything." Eli looked at his daughters, who were preparing for the biggest day of their young lives, while federal investigators prepared to arrest the man who'd been trying to destroy everything they'd built. "What should we do?" he asked. Carmen smiled with the fierce joy of someone who'd been waiting decades for this moment. "We cook," she said simply. "We serve our community. We show the world what authentic food culture looks like. And we trust that truth is stronger than money." Luna was already working on her menu for tomorrow, sauces that told the complete story of their journey, from desperation to discovery to the kind of hope that tasted like home. Saul was coordinating with their online community, organizing support that would ensure tomorrow's competition was witnessed and documented by people who understood what was really at stake. And Eli found himself thinking about Uncle Ernie's letter, "Trust the food, trust your daughters, trust the community." Tomorrow, they'd find out if that was enough to beat corporate power, federal conspiracy, and whatever final sabotage Morello had planned. But tonight, Luna's practice sauce tasted like victory, and that felt like enough magic to carry them through whatever was coming next. The final day of the Southwest Food Truck Championship dawned, with sirens in the distance and federal agents in unmarked cars positioned around the fairgrounds perimeter. Detective Ruiz had warned them the arrests would happen after the competition, but the tension in the air suggested everyone knew something bigger than a cooking contest was about to unfold. Zeke Morello arrived at his pristine truck looking like a man who'd slept poorly, his usual confident smile replaced by something that resembled barely controlled desperation. His team moved with military precision, but there was something frantic about their efficiency, as if they were racing against time. "He knows," Carmen observed, watching Morello's operation from across the plaza. "Question is what he's planning to do about it." The final challenge was announced at 9 a.m. Each team had 4 hours to create a menu that told the story of Southwestern food culture, serving both competition judges and the general public that had gathered to witness the championship's conclusion. Points would be awarded for authenticity, innovation, community impact, and something the head judge called cultural truth, the ability to capture something essential about the heritage they claimed to represent. Luna had spent the morning in meditation-like preparation, organizing her spices and sauces with the focus of someone channeling decades of inherited knowledge. Saul had coordinated their social media strategy, ensuring their online community could follow every moment of the competition in real time. "What's the plan?" Eli asked his daughters as they prepared to begin. "Tell our story," Luna replied, already reaching for ingredients with instinctive confidence. "All of it. The scared parts and the brave parts, and the parts where we didn't know if we could keep going. And prove that authenticity can't be mass-produced," Saul added, adjusting her camera setup to capture every angle of Luna's work. They started with hunger sauce, the first creation Luna had made in Uncle Ernie's truck, back when they were living in their car and every meal was uncertain. But this version was more complex, layered with all the flavors and experiences they'd gathered since then. It tasted like desperation transformed into determination, like the moment when survival became something larger than just getting through another day. Next came community heat, inspired by every route stop they'd visited, every family that had shared their story, every customer who'd paid with smiles instead of money. This sauce captured the essence of connection, the way food became a bridge between strangers and a foundation for the kind of mutual support that couldn't be bought or franchised. The centerpiece was something Luna called Ghost Route Revival, a complex mole that somehow told the complete history of the underground network. It started with flavors that spoke of indigenous traditions, evolved through layers that represented different waves of immigration, and finished with notes that tasted like hope for futures yet to be written. Saul documented everything while managing their streaming audience, which had grown to over 200,000 viewers watching live. Comments poured in from supporters around the world, but also from other food truck operators, immigrant families, and community organizers who saw their story as part of something larger than competition. At Heritage Flavors, Morello's team produced dishes that looked perfect for magazine photography, precisely plated, consistently portioned, designed to appeal to the broadest possible demographic. Their food was technically flawless and utterly soulless, like Southwest cuisine that had been focus grouped into submission. But as the competition progressed, Morello's desperation became more obvious. He argued loudly with judges about scoring criteria, questioned the Mendoza family's permit status, and made increasingly frantic phone calls to people who apparently weren't answering. The breakthrough moment came when Luna decided to serve her truth sauce to the judges, the same creation she'd offered Morello days earlier, the one that revealed different flavors depending on what the taster was hiding. "This is interesting," the head judge said after sampling it. "It tastes different every time I try it." "That's because it responds to who you are," Luna explained with 6-year-old seriousness. "Food knows things about people that people sometimes forget about themselves." Judge after judge sampled the sauce and had similar reactions: surprise, confusion, then recognition of something they couldn't name but couldn't deny. It was impossible to replicate, impossible to mass-produce, impossible to fake. At 1:47 p.m., just as the judging was reaching its climax, federal agents moved in. Ruiz had coordinated the timing perfectly. Morello was arrested while standing in front of television cameras, handcuffed, and read his rights in front of the crowd that had gathered to witness the championship's conclusion. "Zeke Morello, you're under arrest for conspiracy to restrain trade, regulatory fraud, and racketeering in connection with systematic harassment of independent food service operators throughout the American Southwest." The arrest was broadcast live on Soul's stream, watched by hundreds of thousands of viewers who suddenly understood they'd been witnessing more than a cooking competition. The judges announced their decision an hour later. The Mendoza family had won by the largest margin in championship history, with perfect scores in authenticity and cultural truth, and near-perfect marks in every other category. But the real victory was what happened next. Carmen stepped forward with documents that had been prepared months in advance. Incorporation papers for the Ghost Routes Revival Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting independent food operators serving marginalized communities. The championship prize money, combined with Uncle Ernie's inheritance and donations that had poured in through their social media presence, provided enough funding to begin operations immediately. "We're not just reviving the old routes," Carmen announced to the crowd. "We're creating new ones. Supporting food trucks that serve immigrant communities, undocumented families, anyone who needs affordable, culturally authentic food and the dignity that comes with community care." Soul had prepared a presentation that outlined their vision, a network of independent operators coordinated through social media, sharing resources and knowledge, providing mobile support for communities that existing systems failed to serve. Luna would develop signature sauces for partner trucks, each one telling the story of the community it served. "And we're creating something else," Eli added, stepping forward with his daughters, "a mobile mentorship program. Teaching kids like Luna and Saul that they have gifts worth sharing, voices worth hearing, stories worth telling." The crowd erupted in applause, but Eli was looking at his daughters, who had transformed from homeless children into leaders of a movement they were only beginning to understand. 6 months later, the Ghost Routes Revival Foundation operated 43 affiliated food trucks across the Southwest, serving communities from Los Angeles to San Antonio. Luna had developed signature sauces for dozens of operators, each one capturing something essential about the people and places they served. Saul had created an app that coordinated routes, shared resources, and connected community members with the mobile services they needed. Maya had finished her documentary, which premiered at Sundance and sparked conversations about food justice, cultural preservation, and the ways corporations tried to commodify authenticity. Carmen had emerged from decades of careful invisibility to become the foundation's executive director, overseeing operations with the wisdom that came from a lifetime of community care. Detective Ruiz had been promoted after the successful prosecution of what media called the food truck conspiracy, a network of corporate interests that had systematically eliminated independent operators throughout the region. And Eli had found something he'd never expected to discover, that being a father wasn't just about protecting his children from the world, but about helping them change it. The truck still traveled the original ghost routes, now expanded and updated for modern communities. But it also ventured into new territory, following paths that Luna and Soul charted based on need, opportunity, and the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught or manufactured. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, they parked behind a community center in Phoenix where families gathered to share meals and stories and the kind of mutual support that sustained people through difficult times. Luna was teaching a group of children how to taste hope in everyday ingredients. Saul was interviewing elders about their food traditions, documenting knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Eli found himself thinking about Uncle Ernie's letter, now framed and hanging in their permanent kitchen space. Trust the food, trust your daughters, trust the community. It had been enough. More than enough. Outside the truck, the desert wind carried the scent of rain that would come when it was needed, and Luna's latest sauce, something she called Forever Forward, tasted like all the meals still waiting to be shared, all the communities still waiting to be served, all the stories still waiting to be told. The truck pulled away from the community center as the stars appeared overhead, heading toward tomorrow's route stop, toward next week's community, toward a future where food was always about more than just food. Behind them, the neon ghost route sign caught the moonlight and seemed to glow with the promise that some journeys never really end. They just find new roads to travel, new people to feed, new ways to turn survival into something revolutionary. Every mile was a beginning, every meal was a choice. Every day was another chance to prove that authenticity couldn't be bought, communities couldn't be commodified, and love always tasted like home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.